overview effect and seeing Earth from space, I had that feeling very powerfully. I think everyone did. You see how fragile the Earth is. If you're not an environmentalist, it will make you one. The great Jim Lovell quote, he looked back at the Earth from space and he said he realized you don't go to heaven when you die, you go to heaven when you're born. And it's just, that's the feeling that people get when they're in space. You see all this blackness, all this nothingness, and there's one gem of life, and it's Earth.
It is a gem. You've talked a lot about decision making throughout your time with Amazon. What was that decision like to be the first to ride New Shepherd? Like before you talk to your mom?
Yeah.
What the pros and cons? Like actually, as one human being, as a leader of a company, on all fronts, like what was that decision making like?
I decided that first of all, I knew the vehicle extremely well. I know the team who built it. I know the vehicle. I'm very comfortable with the escape system. We put as much effort into the escape system on that vehicle as we put into all the rest of the vehicle combined. It's one of the hardest pieces of engineering in the entire New Shepard architecture.
Can you actually describe what you mean by escape system? What's involved?
We have a solid rocket motor in the base of the crew capsule, so that if anything goes wrong on ascent, while the main rocket engine is firing, we can ignite this solid rocket motor in the base of the crew capsule and escape from the booster. It's a very challenging system to build, design, validate, test, all of these things. It is the reason that I am comfortable letting anyone go on New Shepard. So the booster is as safe and reliable as we can make it, but we're harnessing, whenever you're talking about rocket engines, I don't care what rocket engine you're talking about, you are harnessing such vast power in such a small, compact geometric space. The power density is so enormous that it is impossible to ever be sure that nothing will go wrong. And so the only way to improve safety is to have an escape system. And historically, rockets, human-rated rockets, have had escape systems. Only the space shuttle did not. And but Apollo had one. All of the previous, Gemini, etc. They all had escape systems. And we have on New Shepard unusual escapes. Most escape systems are towers. We have a pusher escape system. So the solid rocket motor is actually embedded in the base of the crew capsule and it pushes. And it's reusable in the sense that if we don't use it, so if we have a nominal mission, we land with it. The tower systems have to be ejected at a certain point in the mission. And so they get wasted even in a nominal mission. And so again, cost really matters on these things. So we figured out how to have the escape system be a reusable, in the event that it's not used, you can reuse it, and have it be a pusher system. It's a very sophisticated thing. So I knew these things. You asked me about my decision to go. And so I know the vehicle very well. I know the people who designed it. I have great trust in them and in the engineering that we did. And I thought to myself, look, if I am not ready to go, then I wouldn't want anyone to go. The tourism vehicle has to be designed, in my view, to be as safe as one can make it. You can't make it perfectly safe; it's impossible. But you just have to. People will do things. People take risks. They climb mountains. They skydive. They do deep underwater scuba diving and so on. People are okay taking risk. You can't eliminate the risk, but it is something. Because it's a tourism vehicle, you have to do your utmost to eliminate those risks. And I felt very good about the system. I think it's one of the reasons I was so calm inside. Maybe others weren't as calm. They didn't know as much about it as I did.
Who was in charge of engaging the escape system?
It's automated.
Okay.
The escape system is completely automated.
So yeah, for tourism, rockets, safety is a huge priority for space exploration also, but a tiny, a delta less.
Yes, I mean, I think for, if you're doing, there are human activities where we tolerate more risk. If you're saving somebody's life, if you are, engaging in real exploration, these are things where, I personally think we would accept more risk, in part because you have to.
Is there a part of you that's frustrated by the rate of progress in Blue Origin?
Blue Origin needs to be much faster, and it's one of the reasons that I left my role as the CEO of Amazon a couple of years ago. I wanted to come in and Blue Origin needs me right now, and so I had always, when I was the CEO of Amazon, my point of view on this is if I'm the CEO of a publicly traded company, it's going to get my full attention, and it's just how I think about things. It was very important to me. I felt I had an obligation to all the stakeholders at Amazon to do that. And so having, turned this and the primary reason I did that is so that I could spend time with Blue Origin, adding some, energy, some sense of urgency. We need to move much faster. And we're going to.
What are the ways to speed it up? So, I mean, there's, you've talked a lot of different ways to sort of, and Amazon, removing barriers for progress and distributing, making everybody autonomous and self-reliant, in terms, all those kinds of things. Does that apply at Blue Origin, or
it does apply? I'm leading this directly. We are going to become the world's most decisive company across any industry. And so, at Amazon, for ever since the beginning, I said, we're going to become the world's most customer-obsessed company. And no matter the industry, one day people are going to come to Amazon from the healthcare industry and want to know, how are you so customer obsessed? How do you act, not just pay lip service to that, but actually do that? And from, all different industries should come want to study us to see how we accomplish that. And the analogous thing at Blue Origin, and will help us move faster, is we're going to become the world's most decisive company. We're going to get really good at taking appropriate technology risk, making those decisions quickly, being bold on those things. That's and having the right culture that supports that. You need people to be ambitious, technically ambitious. If there are 5 ways to do something, we'll study them, but let's study them very quickly and make a decision. We can always change our mind. It doesn't, changing your mind, I talk about one-way doors and two-way doors. Most decisions are two-way doors.
Can you explain that? Because I love that metaphor.
If you make the wrong decision, if it's a two-way door decision, you walk out the door, you pick a door, you walk out, you spend a little time there, turns out to be the wrong decision, you can go back in and pick another door. Some decisions are so consequential and so important, it's so hard to reverse, that they really are one-way door decisions. You go in that door, you're not coming back. And those decisions have to be made very deliberately, very carefully. If you can think of yet another way to analyze the decision, you should slow down and do that. So, when I was CEO of Amazon, I often found myself in the position of being the chief slowdown officer, because somebody would be bringing me a one-way door decision. And it's okay, I can think of 3 more ways to analyze that, so let's go do that. Because we are not going to be able to reverse this one easily. Maybe you can reverse it, but it's going to be very costly, very time consuming. We really have to get this one right from the beginning. And what happens, unfortunately, in companies, what can happen is that you have a one-size-fits-all decision-making process where you end up using the heavyweight process on all decisions,
For everything, yeah.
including the lightweight ones, the two-way door decisions. Two-way door decisions should mostly be made by single individuals or by very small teams deep in the organization. And one-way door decisions are the ones that are the irreversible ones. Those are the ones that should be elevated up to, the senior most executives who should slow them down and make sure that the right thing is being done.
Yeah, part of the skill here is to know the difference between one-way and two-way. I think you mentioned.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you mentioned Amazon Prime. The decision to sort of create Amazon Prime as a one-way door. It's unclear if it is or not, but it probably is, and it's a really big risk to go there.
There are a bunch of decisions like that are, changing the decision is going to be very, very complicated. Some of them are technical decisions too, because some technical decisions are like quick drying cement. If you're once you make them, it gets really hard. Choosing which propellants to use in a vehicle. Selecting LNG for the booster stage and selecting hydrogen for the upper stage. That has turned out to be a very good decision. But if you change your mind, that would be a very big setback. Do you see what I was saying?
Yeah.
So that's the kind of decision you scrutinize very, very carefully. Other things just aren't like. Most decisions are not that way. Most decisions should be made by single individuals, but they need and done quickly, in the full understanding that you can always change your mind.
Yeah, one of the things I really like, perhaps it's not two-way decisions, is I disagree and commit phrase. So so somebody brings up an idea to you, if it's a two-way door, you state that you don't understand enough to agree, but you still back them. I'd love for you to explain that.
Yeah, disagree and commit is a really important principle that saves a lot of arguing.
Yeah.
So,
I'm going to use that in my personal life. I disagree, but commit.
It's very common in any endeavor in life, in business, and anybody where you have teammates. You have a teammate, and the two of you disagree. At some point, you have to make a decision. And, in companies, we tend to organize hierarchically. So there's this, whoever's the more senior person ultimately gets to make the decision. So ultimately, the CEO gets to make that decision. And the CEO may not always make the decision that they agree with. So, I would be the one who would disagree and commit. One of my direct reports would very much want to do something in a particular way. I would think it was a bad idea. I would explain my point of view. They would say, Jeff, I think you're wrong, and here's why. And we would go back and forth. And I would often say, you know what? I don't think you're right, but I'm going to gamble with you. And you're closer to the ground truth than I am. I've known you for 20 years. You have great judgment. I don't know that I'm right either. Not really, not for sure. All these decisions are complicated. Let's do it your way. But at least then you've made a decision. And I'm agreeing to commit to that decision. So I'm not going to be second guessing it. I'm not going to be sniping at it. I'm not going to be saying, I told you so. I'm going to try actively to help make sure it works. That's a really important teammate behavior. There's so many ways that dispute resolution is a really interesting thing on teams. And there are so many ways when two people disagree about something. Even I'm assuming like the case where everybody's well-intentioned. They just have a very different opinion about what the right decision is. And we have in our society and inside companies, we have a bunch of mechanisms that we use to resolve these kinds of disputes. A lot of them are, I think, really bad. So an example of a really bad way of coming to agreement is compromise. So compromise, look, we're in a room here and I could say, Lex, how tall do you think this ceiling is? And you'd be like, I don't know, Jeff, maybe 12 feet tall. And I would say, I think it's 11 feet tall. And then we'd say, you know what, let's just call it 11 and a half feet. That's compromise. Yeah. Instead of the right thing to do is, to get a tape measure or figure out some way of actually measuring, but get in that tape measure and figure out how to get to the top of the ceiling and all these things. That requires energy. compromise, the advantage of compromise as a resolution mechanism is that it's low energy, but it doesn't lead to truth. And so in things like the height of the ceiling, where truth is a knowable thing, you shouldn't allow compromise to be used when you can know the truth. Another really bad resolution mechanism that happens all the time is just who's more stubborn.
Yeah.
This is also, so you have, let's say, two executives who disagree, and they just have a war of attrition. And whichever one gets exhausted first capitulates to the other one. Again, you haven't arrived at truth, and this is very demoralizing. So, this is where escalation, I try to ask people who, on my team, I say, never get to a point where you are resolving something by, who gets exhausted first. Escalate that. I'll help you make the decision. Because that's so de-energizing and such a terrible, lousy way to make a decision.
Do you want to get to the resolution as quickly as possible because that ultimately leads to high velocity?
Yes, and you want to try to get as close to truth as possible.
Yeah.
So you want, exhausting the other person is not truth-seeking.
Yes.
And compromise is not truth-seeking. So, it doesn't mean, and there are a lot of cases where no one knows the real truth, and that's where disagree commit can come in. But escalation is better than war of attrition. Escalate to your boss and say, hey, we can't agree on this. We like each other. We're respectful of each other, but we strongly disagree with each other. We need you to, make a decision here so we can move forward. The decisiveness, moving forward quickly on decisions, as quickly as you responsibly can, is how you increase velocity. Most of what slows things down is taking too long to make decisions at all skill levels. So it has to be part of the culture to get high velocity. Amazon has 1.5 million people, and the company is still fast. We're still decisive. We're still quick. And that's because the culture supports that.
At every scale in a distributed way,
Yes.
try to maximize the velocity of decisions.
Exactly.
You mentioned the lunar program. Let me ask you about that.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on there, and you haven't really talked about it much. So in addition to the Artemis program, NASA, Blue is doing its own lander program. Can you describe it? There's a sexy picture on Instagram with one of them. Is it the MK1, I guess?
Yeah, the Mark 1. The picture is it would be with Bill Nelson, the NASA administrator.
Just to clarify, the lander is the sexy thing about things.
I know it's not me. I know it was either you did the lander or Bill.
Okay.
I
love Bill, but
clarifying.
Okay.
Yes, the Mark 1 lander is designed to take 3,000 kilograms to the surface of the moon in cargo, expendable cargo. It's an expendable lander, lands on the moon, stays there, take 3,000 kilograms to the surface. It can be launched on a single New Glenn flight, which is very important. So it's a relatively simple architecture, just like the human landing system lander, they call the Mark II. Mark 1 is also fueled with liquid hydrogen, and which is for high energy missions like landing on the surface of the moon. The high specific impulse of hydrogen is a very big advantage. The disadvantage of hydrogen has always been that it's such a deep cryogen, it's not storable. So it's constantly boiling off, and you're losing propellant because it's boiling off. And so what we're doing as part of our lunar program is developing solar-powered cryocoolers that can actually make hydrogen a storable propellant for deep space. And that's a real game changer. It's a game changer for any high energy mission. So to the moon, but to the outer planets, to Mars, everywhere.
So the idea with Mark 1, both Mark 1 and Mark 2, is the New Glenn can carry it from the surface of Earth to the surface of the moon.
Exactly. So the Mark 1 is expendable. The lunar lander we're developing for NASA, the Mark II lander, that's part of the Artemis program. They call it the sustaining lander program. So that lander is designed to be reusable. It can land on the surface of the moon in a single stage configuration and then take off. So if you look at the Apollo program, the lunar lander in Apollo was really 2 stages. It would land on the surface, and then it would leave the descent stage on the surface of the moon, and only the ascent stage could go back up into lunar orbit where it would rendezvous with the command module. Here what we're doing is we have a single stage lunar lander that carries down enough propellant so that it can bring the whole thing back up so that it can be reused over and over. And the point of doing that, of course, is to reduce cost so that you can make lunar missions more affordable over time, that's one of NASA's big objectives, because this time, the whole point of Artemis is go back to the moon, but this time to stay. So, back in the Apollo program, we went to the moon 6 times and then ended the program, and it really was too expensive to continue.
And so there's a few questions there, but one is, how do you stay on the moon? What ideas do you have about like a sustaining life where a few folks can stay there for prolonged periods of time?
Well, one of the things we're working on is using lunar resources like lunar regolith to manufacture commodities and even solar cells on the surface of the moon. We've already built a solar cell that is completely made from lunar regolith simulant, and this solar cell is only about 7% power efficient, so it's very inefficient compared to the more advanced solar cells that we make here on Earth. But if you can figure out how to make a practical solar cell factory that you can land on the surface of the moon, and then the raw material for those solar cells is simply lunar regolith, then you can just continue to churn out solar cells on the surface of the moon, have lots of power on the surface of the moon. That will make it easier for people to live on the moon. Similarly, we're working on extracting oxygen from lunar regolith. So lunar regolith by weight has a lot of oxygen in it. It's bound very tightly, as oxides with other elements. And so you have to separate the oxygen, which is very energy intensive. So that also could work together with the solar cells. But if you can, and then ultimately, we may be able to find practical quantities of ice in the permanently shadowed craters on the poles of the moon. And we know there is ice water in those, or water ice in those craters. And we know that we can break that down with electrolysis into hydrogen and oxygen. And then you'd not only have oxygen, but you'd also have a very good high efficiency propellant fuel in hydrogen. So there's a lot we can do to make the moon more sustainable over time. But the very first step, the kind of gate that all of that has to go through, is we need to be able to land cargo and humans on the surface of the moon at an acceptable cost.
To fast forward a little bit, is there any chance Jeff Bezos steps foot on the moon and on Mars? One or the other, or both?
It's very unlikely. I think it's probably something that gets done by future generations by the time it gets to me. I think in my lifetime, that's probably going to be done by professional astronauts. Mm-hmm. Sadly, I would love to sign up for that mission. So don't count me out yet, Lex. Give me a fighting shot here, maybe. Yeah. But I think if we are placing reasonable bets on such a thing in my lifetime, that will continue to be done by professional astronauts.
Yeah. So these are risky, difficult missions,
and probably missions that require a lot of training. You are going there for a very specific purpose to do something. We're going to be able to do a lot on the moon too with automation. So, in terms of setting up these factories and doing all that, we're sophisticated enough now with automation that we probably don't need humans to tend those factories and machines. So there's a lot that's going to be done in both modes.
So I have to ask the bigger picture question about the two companies pushing humanity forward out towards the stars, Blue Origin and SpaceX. Are you competitors, collaborators? Which and to what degree?
Well, I would say, just like the internet is big and there are lots of winners at all scale levels. I mean, there are half a dozen giant companies that, the internet has made, but there are a bunch of medium-sized companies and a bunch of small companies, all successful, all with profit streams, all driving great customer experiences. That's what we want to see in space, that kind of dynamism. And space is big. There's room for a bunch of winners, and it's going to happen at all scale levels. And so, SpaceX is going to be successful for sure. I want Blue Origin to be successful, and I hope there are another, 5 companies right behind us.
But, I spoke to Elon a few times recently about you, about Blue Origin, and he was very positive about you as a person and very supportive of all the efforts you've been leading at Blue. What's your thoughts? You worked with a lot of leaders at Amazon, at Blue. What's your thoughts about Elon as a human being and a leader?
Well, I don't really know Elon very well. I know his public persona, but I also know you can't know anyone by their public persona. It's impossible. I mean, you may think you do, but I guarantee you don't. So I don't really know. You know Elon way better than I do, Lex. But in terms of his judging by the results, he must be a very capable leader. There's no way you could have, Tesla and SpaceX without being a capable leader. It's impossible.
Yeah, I hope you guys hang out sometimes, shake hands, and sort of have a kind of friendship that would inspire just the entirety of humanity. Because what you're doing is like one of the big, grand challenges ahead for humanity.
Well, I agree with you, and I think in a lot of these endeavors, we're very like-minded.
Yeah.
So I think, I'm not saying we're identical, but I think we're very like-minded, and so I love that idea.
All right, going back to sexy pictures on your Instagram. There's a video of you from the early days of Amazon giving a tour of your quote sort of offices. I think your dad is holding the camera.
He is, yeah, I know, yes. This is what the giant orange extension cord.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're like explaining the genius of the extension cord. And obviously, it's a desk and the CRT monitor, and sort of that's where all the magic happens. I forget what your dad said. But this is like the center of it all. So, what was it like? What was going through your mind at that time? You left a good job in New York and took this leap. Were you excited? Were you scared?
So excited and scared and anxious. Thought the odds of success were low. Told all of our early investors that I thought there was a 30% chance of success. I mean, by which I just would get your money back, not like turning out what actually happened. Because that's the truth. Every startup company is unlikely to work. It's helpful to be in reality about that. But that doesn't mean you can't be optimistic. So you kind of have to have this duality in your head. Like on the one hand, you know what the baseline statistics say about startup companies. And on the other hand, you have to ignore all of that and just be 100% sure it's going to work. And you're doing both things at the same time. You're holding that contradiction in your head. But it was so exciting. I love it. From 1994 when the company was founded to 1995 when we opened our doors, all the way until today. I find Amazon so exciting, and that doesn't mean it's like full of pain, full of problems. It's like there's so many things that need to be resolved and worked and made better and etc. But on balance, it's so fun. It's such a privilege. It's been such a joy. I feel so grateful that I've been part of that journey. It's just been incredible.
So in some sense, you don't want a single day of comfort. You've written about this many times. We'll talk about your writing, which I would highly recommend people read in just the letters to shareholders. So you wrote explaining the idea of day one thinking. I think you first wrote about it in 97 letters to shareholders. Then you also, in a way, wrote about, sad to say, is your last letter to shareholders as CEO. And you said that day two is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death. And that is why it's always day one. Can you explain this day one thing? This is a really powerful way to describe the beginning and the journey of Amazon.
It's really a very simple and I think age-old idea about renewal and rebirth, and like every day is day one. Every day you are deciding what you're going to do, and you are not trapped by what you were or who you were or any self-consistency. Self-consistency even can be a trap. And so day one thinking is kind of, we start fresh every day, and we get to make new decisions every day about invention, about customers, about how we're going to operate, what our, even as deeply as what our principles are. We can go back to that. It turns out we don't change those very often, but we change them occasionally. And when we work on programs at Amazon, we often make a list of tenets. And the tenets are kind of, they're not principles, they're a little more tactical than principles, but it's kind of the main ideas that we want this program to embody, whatever those are. And one of the things that we do is we put, these are the tenets for this program, and then in parentheses, we always put, unless you know a better way. Mm-hmm. And that idea, unless you know a better way, is so important, because you never want to get trapped by dogma. You never want to get trapped by history. It doesn't mean you discard history or ignore it. There's so much value in what has worked in the past, but you can't be blindly following what you've done. And that's the heart of day one, is you're always starting fresh.
And to the question of how to fend off day two, you said such a question can't have a simple answer, as you're saying. There will be many elements, multiple paths, and many traps. I don't know the whole answer, but I may know bits of it. Here's a starter pack of essentials. Maybe others come to mind. For day one, defense. Customer obsession, a skeptical view of proxies, the eager adoption of external trends, and high-velocity decision-making. So we talk about high-velocity decision-making. That's more difficult than it sounds. So maybe you can pick one that stands out to you that you can comment on. Eager adoption of external trends, high-velocity decision-making, skeptical view of proxies. How do you fight off day two?
Well, I'll talk about, because I think it's the one that is maybe in some ways the hardest to understand, is the skeptical view of proxies. One of the things that happens in business, probably anything that you have an ongoing program and something is underway for a number of years, is you develop certain things that you're managing to, like, let's say, typical case would be a metric. And that metric isn't the real underlying thing. And so, maybe the metric is efficiency metric around customer contacts per unit sold or something like that. If you sell 1 million units, how many customer contacts do you get? Or how many returns do you get? And so on and so on. And so what happens is a little bit of a kind of inertia sets in, where somebody a long time ago invented that metric. And they invented that metric. They decided we need to watch for, customer returns per unit sold as an important metric. But they had a reason why they chose that metric. The person who invented that metric decided it was worth watching. And then fast forward 5 years, that metric is the proxy.
The proxy
real
for
thing,
truth.
the proxy for truth, the proxy for customer, say in this case, it's a proxy for customer happiness. But that metric is not actually customer happiness. It's a proxy for customer happiness. The person who invented the metric understood that connection. 5 years later, a kind of inertia can set in, and you forget the truth behind why you were watching that metric in the first place. And the world shifts a little. And now that proxy isn't as valuable as it used to be, or it's missing something. And you have to be on alert for that. You have to know, okay, I don't really care about this metric. I care about customer happiness. And this metric is worth putting energy into, following, improving, and scrutinizing, only in so much as it actually affects customer happiness. And so you got to constantly be on guard. And it's very, very common. This is a nuanced problem. It's very common, especially in large companies, that they're managing to metrics that they don't really understand. They don't really know why they exist. And the world may have shifted out from under them a little. And the metrics are no longer as relevant as they were when somebody 10 years earlier invented the metric.
That is a nuance, but it's a big problem, right?
It's a huge problem.
There's something so compelling to have a nice metric to try to optimize.
Yes. And by the way, you do need metrics.
Yes, you do.
You know, you can't ignore them. You want them. But you just have to be constantly on guard. This is, a way to slip into day two thinking would be to manage your business to metrics that you don't really understand, and you're not really sure why they were invented in the first place, and you're not sure they're still as relevant as they used to be.
What does it take to be the guy or gal who brings up the point that this proxy might be outdated? I guess, what does it take to have a culture that enables that in a meeting? Because that's a very uncomfortable thing to bring up in a meeting. We all show up here, it's a Friday.
This is you have just asked $1 million question. So this is what if I generalize what you're asking, you're talking in general about truth telling.
Yeah.
And we humans are not really truth-seeking animals. We are social animals.
Yeah, we are.
And, take you back in time 10,000 years and you're in a small village. If you go along to get along, you can survive. You can procreate. If you're the village truth teller, you might get clubbed to death in the middle of the night. Truths are often, they don't want to be heard because important truths can be uncomfortable, they can be awkward, they can be exhausting.
Impolite.
Yes,
all that kind of stuff.
Challenging. They can make people defensive, even if that's not the intent. But any high-performing organization, whether it's a sports team, a business, a political organization, an activist group, I don't care what it is, any high-performing organization has to have mechanisms and a culture that supports truth-telling. One of the things you have to do is you have to talk about that. You have to talk about the fact that it takes energy to do that. You have to talk to people. You have to remind people it's okay that it's uncomfortable. To literally tell people it's not what we're designed to do as humans. It's not really, it's kind of a side effect. We can do that. But it's not how we survive. We mostly survive by being social animals and being cordial and cooperative, and that's really important. And so there's science is all about truth telling. It's actually a very formal mechanism for trying to tell the truth. And even in science, you find that it's hard to tell the truth, right? And even, you're supposed to have a hypothesis, test it, and find data, and reject the hypothesis, and so on. It's not easy.
But even in science, there's like the senior scientists and the junior scientists,
Correct.
And then there's a hierarchy of humans where seniority matters in the scientific process, which is.
And that's true inside companies too. And so you want to set up your culture so that the most junior person can overrule the most senior person if they have data. And that really is about trying to, there are little things you can do. So, for example, in every meeting that I attend, I always speak last. And I know from experience that, if I speak first, even very strong-willed, highly intelligent, high judgment participants in that meeting will wonder, well, if Jeff thinks that, I came in this meeting thinking one thing, but maybe I'm not right. And so you can do little things like, if you're the most senior person in the room, go last. Let everybody else go first. In fact, ideally, let's try to have the most junior person go first, and the second, try to go in order of seniority, so that you can hear everyone's opinion in a kind of unfiltered way. Because we really do. We actually literally change our opinions. If somebody who you really respect says something, it makes you change your mind a little.
So you're saying implicitly or explicitly give permission for people to have a strong opinion, that as long as it's backed by data.
Yes, and sometimes it can even, by the way, a lot of our most powerful truths turn out to be hunches. They turn out to be based on anecdotes. They're intuition based, and sometimes you don't even have strong data. But you may know the person well enough to trust their judgment. You may feel yourself leaning in. It may resonate with a set of anecdotes you have, and then you may be able to say, something about that feels right. Let's go collect some data on that. Let's try to see if we can actually know whether it's right. But for now, let's not disregard it because it feels right. You can also fight inherent bias. There's an optimism bias. Like, if there are two interpretations of a new set of data, and one of them is happy and one of them is unhappy, it's a little dangerous to jump to the conclusion that the happy interpretation is right. You may want to sort of compensate for that human bias of looking for, trying to find the silver lining. It's that might be good, but I'm going to go with it's bad for now until we're sure.
So speaking of happiness, bias, data collection, and anecdotes, you have to, how's that for a transition? You have to tell me the story of the call you made, the customer service call you made to demonstrate a point about wait times.
Yeah, this is very early in the history of Amazon, and we were going over a weekly business review and a set of documents, and I have a saying, which is when the data and the anecdotes disagree, the anecdotes are usually right. And it doesn't mean you just slavishly go follow the anecdotes then. It means you go examine the data. Because it's usually not that the data is being miscollected. It's usually that you're not measuring the right thing. And so, if you have a bunch of customers complaining about something, and at the same time, your metrics look like they shouldn't be complaining, you should doubt the metrics. And an early example of this was we had metrics that showed that our customers were waiting, I think, less than, 60 seconds when they called a 1-800 number to get, phone customer service. The wait time was supposed to be less than 60 seconds. And we had a lot of complaints that it was longer than that. And anecdotally, it seemed longer than that. Like, I would call customer service myself. And so one day we're in a meeting or going through the WBR and the weekly business review. And we get to this metric in the deck. And the guy who leads customer service is fitting the metric. And I said, okay, let's call. I picked up the phone and I dialed the 1-800 number and called customer service. And we just waited in silence for
What did it turn out to be?
Oh, it was really long, more than 10 minutes, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was many minutes. And so, it dramatically made the point that something was wrong with the data collection. We weren't measuring the right thing, and that we set off a whole chain of events where we started measuring it right. And that's an example, by the way, of truth telling is like, that's an uncomfortable thing to do, but you have to seek truth even when it's uncomfortable, and you have to get people's attention, and they have to buy into it, and they have to get energized around really fixing things.
So that speaks to the obsession of the customer experience. So one of the defining aspects of your approach to Amazon is just being obsessed with making customers happy. I think companies sometimes say that, but Amazon is really obsessed with that. I think there's something really profound to that, which is seeing the world through the eyes of the customer, like the customer experience, the human being that's using the product, that's enjoying the product.
What's going on, Caspian? See how you living?
That make up their experience.
Living the dream, baby. Working on these bots. You know how I am.
Another really good and kind of deep question, because there are big things that are really important to manage, and then there are small things. Internally to Amazon, we call them paper cuts. So
excellent.
We have
dude, you should stick around. Fall asleep in here.
Most of the energy goes into the big things, as it should. So, and you can identify the big things. And I would encourage anybody, if anybody listening to this is an entrepreneur, small business, whatever, think about the things that are not going to change over 10 years. And those are probably the big things. So like, I know in our retail business at Amazon, 10 years from now, customers are still going to want low prices. I know they're still going to want fast delivery. And I just know they're still going to want big selection. So it's impossible to imagine a scenario where 10 years from now, I say, where customers just, I love Amazon, I just wish the prices were a little higher. Or I love Amazon, I just wish you'd deliver a little more slowly. So when you identify the big things, you can tell they're worth putting energy into because they're stable in time. Okay. But you're asking about something a little different, which is in every customer experience, there are those big things, and it's astonishingly hard to focus even on just the big things. So even though they're obvious, they're really hard to focus on. But in addition to that, there are all these little tiny customer experience deficiencies, and we call those paper cuts. So we make long lists of them, and then we have dedicated teams that go fix paper cuts, because the teams working on the big issues never get to the paper cuts. They never work their way down the list to get to, they're working on big things, as they should, and as you want them to. And so you need special teams who are charged with fixing paper cuts.
Well, where would you put on the paper cut spectrum the buy now with one click button, which is, I think, pretty genius. So to me, like, okay, my interaction with things I love on the internet. There's things I do a lot. I maybe representing like a human. I would love for those things to be frictionless. For example, booking airline. Just saying. But it's buying a thing with one click, making the fact experience frictionless, intuitive, all aspects of it. Like that just fundamentally makes my life better. Not just in terms of efficiency, in terms of some kind of
cognitive load.
Yeah, cognitive load and peace, inner peace and happiness. First of all, buying stuff isn't a pleasant experience. Having enough money to buy a thing and then buying it is a pleasant experience. And like having pain around that is somehow just you're ruining a beautiful experience. And I guess all I'm saying as a person who loves good ideas is that a paper cut a solution to paper cut?
Yes. So it's probably that particular thing is probably a solution to a number of paper cuts. So if you go back and look at our order pipeline and how people shop on Amazon before we invented one-click shopping, there was more friction. There was a whole series of paper cuts, and that invention eliminated a bunch of paper cuts. And I think you're absolutely right, by the way, that when you come up with something like one-click shopping, again, this is like so ingrained in people now. I would test that you even notice it. I mean, Most
Every
people-
time I click the button,
most people never
surge of happiness.
There is in the perfect invention, for the perfect moment, in the perfect context, there is real beauty. It is actual beauty, and it feels good. It's emotional. It's emotional for the inventor. It's emotional for the team that builds it. It's emotional for the customer. It's a big deal, and you can feel those things.
But to keep coming up with that idea, with those kinds of ideas, like this is that they weren't thinking of it.
Yeah, and you need a big group of people who feel that kind of satisfaction with creating that kind of beauty.
There's a lot of books written about you. There's a book, Invent and Wander, where Walter Isaacson does mention. It's mostly collected writings of yours. I've read that. I also recommend people to check out the Founders podcast. That covers you a lot and there's different analysis of different business advice you did over the years. I bring all that up because I saw that there a mention that you said that books are an antidote for short attention span. And I forget how it was phrased, but that when you were thinking about
But
the
just for
Kindle,
shit.
that you're thinking about how technology changes us. Yeah,
We co-evolve
yeah.
with our tools. So, we invent new tools, and then our tools change us.
Which is fascinating to think
It
about.
goes in a circle.
And there's some aspect, even just inside business, where you don't just make the customer happy, but you also have to think about, like, where is this going to take humanity if you zoom out a bit.
100%. And, you can feel your
Don't
brain.
get in the night, kids.
Brains are plastic. And you can feel your brain getting reprogrammed. I remember the first time this happened to me was with Tetris. When it first came on the scene, I'm sure you've had, anybody who's been a game player has this experience where you close your eyes to lay down to go to sleep and you see all the little blocks moving and you're kind of rotating them in your mind and you can just tell as you walk around the world that you have rewired your brain to play Tetris. But that happens with everything. And so, one of the, I think, we still have yet to see the full repercussions of this, I fear. I think one of the things that we've done online, largely because of social media, is we have trained our brains to be really good at processing super short form content. And your podcast flies in the face of this. You do these long format things, and reading books is a long format thing. And we all do more of if something is convenient, we do more of it. And so when you make tools, we carry around we carry around in our pocket a phone. And one of the things that phone does, for the most part, is it is an attention shortening device. Because most of the things we do on our phone shorten our attention spans. And I'm not even going to say we know for sure that that's bad, but I do think it's happening. It's one of the ways we're co-evolving with that tool. But I think it's important to spend some of your time and some of your life doing long attention span things.
Yeah, I think you've spoken about the value in your own life of focus, a singular focus on a thing for long periods of time. And that's certainly what books do. And that's certainly what that piece of technology does. But I bring all that up to ask you about another piece of technology, AI, that has the potential to have various trajectories to have an impact on human civilization. How do you think AI will change us?
You're talking about generative AI, large language models, things like ChatGPT and its soon successors, and these are incredibly powerful technologies. To believe otherwise is to bury your head in the sand, soon to be even more powerful. It's interesting to me that large language models in their current form are not inventions, they're discoveries. the telescope was an invention. But looking through it at Jupiter, knowing that it had moons was a discovery. My God, it has moons. And that's what Galileo did. And so this is closer on that spectrum of invention. We know exactly what happens with a 787. It's an engineered object. We designed it. We know how it behaves. We don't want any surprises. Large language models are much more like discoveries. We're constantly getting surprised by their capabilities. They're not really engineered objects. Then, you have this debate about whether they're going to be good for humanity or bad for humanity. Even specialized AI could be very bad for humanity. I mean, it's just regular machine learning models that can make, certain weapons of war that could be incredibly destructive and very powerful. And they're not general AIs. They could just be very smart weapons. And so we have to think about all of those things. I'm very optimistic about this. So even in the face of all this uncertainty, my own view is that these powerful tools are much more likely to help us and save us even than they are to, on balance, hurt us and destroy us. I think, we humans have a lot of ways of, we can make ourselves go extinct. These things may help us not do that. So they may actually save us. So the people who are overly concerned, in my view, overly concerned. So this is a valid debate. I think that they may be missing part of the equation, which is how helpful they could be in making sure we don't destroy ourselves. I don't know if you saw the movie Oppenheimer, but to me, personally, I loved the movie, and I thought the best part of the movie is this bureaucrat played by Robert Downey Jr., who, some people have talked to think that's the most boring part of the movie. I thought it was the most fascinating, because what's going on here is you realize we have invented these awesome, destructive, powerful technologies called nuclear weapons, and they are managed, and we humans we're not really capable of wielding those weapons. Where that's what he represented in the movie. Is here's this guy who is he wrongly thinks he's like being so petty. He thinks that he said something, that Oppenheimer said something bad to Einstein about him. They didn't talk about him at all, as we find out in the final scene of the movie. And yet he spent his career trying to be vengeful and petty. And that's the problem. We as a species are not really sophisticated enough and mature enough to handle these technologies. And so, and by the way, before you get to general AI and the possibility of AI having agency, there's a lot of things that have to happen, but there's so much benefit that's going to come from these technologies in the meantime, and even before they're, general AI in terms of better medicines and better tools to develop more technologies and so on. So I think it's an incredible moment to be alive and to witness the transformations that are going to happen. How quickly it'll happen, no one knows, but over the next 10 years and 20 years, I think we're going to see really remarkable advances, and I personally am very excited about it.
First of all, really interesting to say that's discoveries that it's true that we don't know the limits of what's possible with the current language models.
We don't.
And it could be a few tricks and hacks here and there that open doors to whole entire new possibilities.
We do know that humans are doing something different from these models, in part because we're so power efficient. the human brain does remarkable things, and it does it on about 20 watts of power. And the AI techniques we use today use many kilowatts of power to do equivalent tasks. So there's something interesting about the way the human brain does this. And also, we don't need as much data. So like self-driving cars, you have to drive billions and billions of miles to learn how to drive, and your average 16-year-old figures it out with many fewer miles. So there are still some tricks, I think, that we have yet to learn. I don't think we've learned the last trick. I don't think it's just a question of scaling things up. But what's interesting is that just scaling things up, and I put just in quotes because it's actually hard to scale things up, but just scaling things up also appears to pay huge dividends.
Yeah, and there's some more nuanced aspects about human beings that's interesting to be able to accomplish, like being truly original and novel, to large language models being able to come up with some truly new ideas. That's one, and the other one is truth. It seems that large language models are very good at sounding like they're saying a true thing, but they don't require or often have a grounding in sort of a mathematical truth. It basically is a very good bullshitter. So if there's not enough data, if there's not enough sort of data in the training data about a particular topic, it's just going to concoct accurate sounding narratives, which is a very fascinating problem to try to solve. How do you get language models to infer what is true and not, to sort of introspect?
Yeah, they need to be taught to say, I don't know, more often.
Yeah.
And I know several humans who could be taught that as well.
And then the other stuff, because you're still a bit involved in the Amazon side with the AI things, the other open question is what kind of products are created from this?
Oh, so many.
Yeah.
I mean, we have Alexa and Echo, and Alexa has hundreds of millions of installed base, inputs. And so there's Alexa everywhere, and guess what? Alexa is about to get a lot smarter.
Yeah.
And so that's really, from a product point of view, that's super exciting.
There's so many opportunities there.
So many opportunities. Shopping assistant, all that stuff is amazing. And AWS, we're building Titan, which is our foundational model. We're also building Bedrock, which are corporate clients at AWS, or enterprise clients. They want to be able to use these powerful models with their own corporate data without accidentally contributing their corporate data to that model.
Yeah.
And so those are the tools we're building for them with Bedrock. So there's tremendous opportunity here.
Yeah, the security, the privacy, all those things are fascinating. There's so much value can be gained by training on private data. You want to keep it secure. It's a fascinating technical problem.
This is a very challenging technical problem, and it's one that we're making progress on and dedicated to solving for our customers.
Do you think there will be a day when humans and robots, maybe Alexa, have a romantic relationship?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at the spectrum of human variety and what people like, sexual variety,
yes.
There are people who like everything. So the answer to your question has to be yes.
I guess I'm asking
how
why.
widespread that will be.
All right.
But it will happen.
I was just asking when for a friend. That's all right. Moving on. Next question. What's a perfectly productive day in the life of Jeff Bezos? You're one of the most productive humans in the world.
Well, first of all, I get up in the morning and I putter. I like have a coffee.
Can you define putter?
Just like I slowly move around. I'm not as productive as you might think I am. I mean, because I do believe in wandering, and I read my phone for a while. I read newspapers for a while. I chat with Lauren. I drink my first coffee. So I move pretty slowly in the first couple of hours. I get up early, just naturally, and then I exercise most days, and most days it's not that hard for me. Some days it's really hard, and I do it anyway. I don't want to, and it's painful, and I'm like, why am I here? And I don't want to do it.
Why am I here at the gym?
Why am I here at the gym? Why don't I do something else? It's not always easy.
What's your source of motivation in those moments?
I know that I'll feel better later if I do it. And so, like, the real source of motivation, I can tell the days when I skip it. I'm not quite as alert. I don't feel as good. And then there's harder motivations. It's longer term. You want to be healthy as you age. You want health span. You want, ideally, you want to be healthy and moving around when you're 80 years old. So there's a lot of, but that kind of motivation is so far in the future, it can be very hard to work in the second. So thinking about the fact, I'll feel better in about 4 hours if I do it now. I have more energy for the rest of my day, and so on and so on.
What's your exercise routine, just to linger on that? How much you curl? What are we talking about here? That's all I do at the gym, so
my routine, on a good day, I do about half an hour of cardio, and I do about 45 minutes of weightlifting, resistance training of some kind, mostly weights. I have a trainer who, I love, who pushes me, which is really helpful. I'll be like, he'll say, Jeff, do you think you can go up on that weight a little bit? And I'll think about it, and I'll be like, no, I don't think so. And he'll look at me and say, yeah, I think you can. And of course he's right.
Yeah,
so it's helpful to have somebody push you a little bit.
But almost every day you do that.
I do almost every day. I do a little bit of cardio and a little bit of weightlifting, and I rotate. I do a pulling day and a pushing day and a leg day. It's all pretty standard stuff.
So puttering, coffee, gym.
Puttering, coffee, gym, and then work.
What's work look like? What are the productive hours look like for you?
A couple years ago, I left as the CEO of Amazon, and I have never worked harder in my life. I am working so hard, and I'm mostly enjoying it, but there are also some very painful days. Most of my time is spent on Blue Origin, and I'm so deeply involved here now for the last couple of years. In the big, I love it. In the small, there's all the frustrations that come along with everything. We're trying to get to rate manufacturing, as we talked about. That's super important. We'll get there. We just hired a new CEO, a guy I've known for close to 15 years now, a guy named Dave Limp, who I love. He's amazing. So we're super lucky to have Dave. And, you're going to see us move faster. So my day of work, reading documents, having meetings, sometimes in person, sometimes over Zoom, depends on where I am. It's all about, the technology, it's about the organization, it's about, I'm very, I have architecture and technology meetings almost every day on various subsystems inside the vehicle, inside the engines. It's super fun for me. My favorite part of it is the technology. My least favorite part of it is, building organizations and so on. That's important, but it's also my least favorite part. So, that's what they call work. You don't always get to do what you want to do.
How do you achieve time where you can focus and truly think?
I do little thinking retreats. So this is not the only, I can do that all day long. I'm very good at focusing. I'm very good at, I don't keep to a strict schedule. Like my meetings often go longer than I plan for them to because I believe in wandering. My perfect meeting starts with a crisp document. So the document should be written with such clarity that it's like angels seen from on high. I like a crisp document and a messy meeting. And so the meeting is about like asking questions that nobody knows the answer to, and trying to like wander your way to a solution. And that is, when that happens just right, it makes all the other meetings worthwhile. It feels good. It has a kind of beauty to it. It has an aesthetic beauty to it, and you get real breakthroughs in meetings like that.
Can you actually describe the Chris document? Like, this is one of the legendary aspects of Amazon, of the way you approach meetings. This 6-page memo. Maybe first describe the process of running a meeting with memos. And
Meetings at Amazon and at Blue Origin are unusual. When we get when new people come in, like a new executive joins, they're a little taken aback sometimes because the typical meeting will start with a 6-page narratively structured memo, and we do study hall. For 30 minutes, we sit there silently together in the meeting and read, make notes in the margins, and then we discuss. And the reason, by the way, we do study, you could say, I would like everybody to read these memos in advance, but the problem is people don't have time to do that, and they end up coming to the meeting having only skimmed the memo, or maybe not read it at all, and they're trying to catch up. And also bluffing like they were in college, having pretended to do the reading. It's better just to carve out the time for people. So now we're all on the same page. We've all read the memo. And now we can have a really elevated discussion. And this is so much better from having a slideshow presentation, a PowerPoint presentation of some kind, where that has so many difficulties. But one of the problems is PowerPoint is really designed to persuade. It's kind of a sales tool. And internally, the last thing you want to do is sell. You're truth seeking. You're trying to find truth. And the other problem with PowerPoint is it's easy for the author and hard for the audience. And a memo is the opposite. It's hard to write a 6-page memo. A good 6-page memo might take 2 weeks to write. You have to write it, you have to rewrite it, you have to edit it, you have to talk to people about it, they have to poke holes in it for you, you write it again. It may take 2 weeks. So the author, it's really a very difficult job. But for the audience, it's much better. So you can read a half hour, and there are little problems with PowerPoint presentations too. Senior executives interrupt with questions halfway through the presentation. That question is going to be answered on the next slide, but you never got there. Just read the whole memo in advance. I often write lots of questions that I have in the margins of these memos. And then I go cross them all out because by the time they get to the end of the memo, they've been answered. That's why I save all that time. You also get, the person who's preparing the memo. We talked earlier about, groupthink and the fact that I go last in meetings and that you don't want, your ideas to kind of pollute the meeting prematurely. The author of the memo is kind of got to be very vulnerable. They got to put all their thoughts out there, and they've got to go first. But that's great because it makes them really good, and you get to see their real ideas, and you're not trampling on them accidentally in a big, PowerPoint presentation.
What's that feel like when you've authored a thing and then you're sitting there and everybody's reading the thing? You're like,
I think it's mostly terrifying.
Yeah. Like maybe in a good way.
I think it's
like purifying.
I think it's terrifying in a productive way.
Yeah.
But I think it's emotionally a very nerve-wracking experience.
Is there art, science to the writing of the 6-page memo, or just writing in general too?
It's really got to be a real memo. So it means paragraphs have topic sentences, the verbs, the nouns. You can't. That's the other problem with PowerPoint presentations. They're often just bullet points, and you can hide a lot of sloppy thinking behind bullet points. When you have to write in complete sentences with narrative structure, it's really hard to hide sloppy thinking. So it forces the author to be at their best, and so you're getting somebody's really their best thinking. And then you don't have to spend a lot of time trying to tease that thinking out of the person. You've got it from the very beginning. So it really saves you time in the long run.
So that part is crisp and then the rest is messy. Crisp document.
Yeah, so you don't want to pretend that the discussion should be crisp.
Yeah.
There's, most meetings you're trying to solve a really hard problem. There's a different kind of meeting which we call weekly business reviews or business reviews. They may be weekly or monthly or daily, whatever they are. But these business review meetings, that's usually for incremental improvement, and you're looking at a series of metrics. Every time it's the same metrics. Those meetings can be very efficient. They can start on time and end on time.
So we're about to run out of time, which is a good time to ask about the 10,000-year clock. Yes. That's what I'm known for, is the humor. Okay. Can you explain what the 10,000-year clock is?
10,000-year clock is a physical clock of monumental scale. It's about 500 feet tall. It's inside a mountain in West Texas in a chamber that's about 12 feet in diameter and 500 feet tall. 10,000-year clock is an idea conceived by a brilliant guy named Danny Hillis way back in the 80s. The idea is to build a clock as a symbol for long-term thinking. And you can kind of just very conceptually think of the 10,000-year clock as it ticks once a year. It chimes once, every 100 years, and the cuckoo comes out once every 1,000 years. So it just sort of slows everything down. And it's a completely mechanical clock. It is designed to last 10,000 years with no human intervention. So the material choices and everything else. It's in a remote location, both to protect it, but also so that visitors have to kind of make a pilgrimage. The idea is that over time, this will take hundreds of years, but over time, it will take on the patina of age. And then it will become a symbol for long-term thinking that will actually, hopefully, get humans to extend their thinking horizons. And in my view, that's really important as we have become, as a species, as a civilization, more powerful. We're really affecting the planet now. We're really affecting each other. We have weapons of mass destruction. We have all kinds of things where we can really hurt ourselves. And the problems we create can be so large. The unintended consequences of some of our actions, like climate change, putting carbon in the atmosphere is a perfect example. That's an unintended consequence of the Industrial Revolution. There's not a lot of benefits from it, but we've also got this side effect that is very detrimental. We need to start training ourselves to think longer term. Long-term thinking is a giant lever. You can literally solve problems if you think long-term that are impossible to solve if you think short-term. And we aren't really good at thinking long-term. It's not really, we're kind of, 5 years is a tough time frame for most institutions to think past. And we probably need to stretch that to 10 years and 15 years and 20 years and 25 years. And we'd do a better job for our children or our grandchildren if we could stretch those thinking horizons. And so the clock is, in a way, it's an art project. It's a symbol. And if it ever has any power to influence people to think longer term, that won't happen for hundreds of years. But we have to, rebuild it now and let it accrue the patina of age.
Do you think humans will be here when the clock runs out here on Earth?
I think so. But, the United States won't exist. Like, whole civilizations rise and fall. 10,000 years is so long. Like, no nation state has ever survived for anywhere close to 10,000 years.
And the increasing rate of progress makes that
even less likely. So, do I think humans will be here? Yes. What, how will we have changed ourselves, and what will we be, and so on and so on? I don't know, but I think we'll be here.
On that grand scale, a human life feels tiny. Do you ponder your own mortality? Are you afraid of death?
No, I used to be afraid of death. I did. I remember as a young person being kind of very scared of mortality. You didn't want to think about it and so on. And always had and as I've gotten older, I'm 59 now. As I've gotten older, somehow that fear has sort of gone away. I don't. I would like to stay alive for as long as possible, but I'd like to be. I'm really more focused on health span. I want to be healthy. I want that square wave. I want to, be healthy, and then gone. I want the long decay. And I'm curious. I want to see how things turn out. I'd like to be here. I love my family and my close friends, and I'm curious about them. I want to see. So I have a lot of reasons to stay around, but mortality it doesn't have that effect on me that it did, maybe when I was in my 20s.
Well, Jeff, thank you for creating Amazon, one of the most incredible companies in history, and thank you for trying your best to make humans a multiplanetary species, expanding out into our solar system, maybe beyond, to meet the aliens out there. And thank you for talking today.
Well, Lex, thank you for doing your part to lengthen our attention spans. Appreciate that very much.
Thanks for listening to this conversation with Jeff Bezos. To support this podcast, please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, let me leave you with some words from Jeff Bezos himself. Be stubborn on vision, but flexible on the details. Thank you for listening, and hope to see you next time.
That some of these serial killer long-haulers may have families that have no idea what the person is up to. That is true. In many of the cases, there was one case I featured in the book where the female partner is very a girlfriend of the trucker was well aware and even aided and abetted the children. Yeah, but that is an aberration. By and large, we are talking about absolute loners who have either, and I asked this question, nature or nurture questions, right? Who is it that's attracted to certain kinds of long-haul trucking? And there are various kinds of trucking, as you listeners know, from reefers to refrigerated trucks to flatbed. I rode a flatbed. The driver who graciously allowed me to join him. But there's hazmat, there's tankers, there's low point and heavy extra tall loads, there's wide and extra heavy loads, and there's drive-ins or movie drive-ins across the country. I could deep into the question of chicken and egg. At what point is a serial killer made? Is it a man with as young as age 5, 10, 15? Is it drawn to long-haul trucking, to the isolation, certain kind of trucking? Now, let's get deeper into this in terms of what kind of trucking, what kind of trucker is more likely to kill. And then I get into the victims and ask similar questions. How do they fall down the trap of practice? And who among them is more likely to fall prey to a serial killer trucker? Next hour, we'll take calls, and we have lots of truckers that listen to this program. They may call in, and who knows, there may be some of these suspects. You never know. I hope they do, and I'm eager to talk about it because, believe it or not, I see a bright future ahead for American trucking. The economic impact, George, is staggering. $850 billion in gross revenue just last year. Grocery stores were stocked selling goods for 3 days if truckers stopped trucking. But there's also a dark side that in statistics, and the statistics include surveys, large surveys, anonymous surveys of truckers who say, 10%. And say they drink every day, even while they're on even on their driving days. 20% say they binge drink 5 or more drinks at a time, and 44% are experiencing symptoms of major depression. So, we've got some good things to say, but the profession needs a lot more to honor what they do for others. We're going to take a short break with Frank Iglusi. His book is called Long Haul. We'll come back and chat more with them. Next hour, we open up the phone. Never miss a detail of a show or a guest. Sign up for the Ghost Zone email newsletter. Available for free at coasttocoastam.com. issue. They're searching, they're grasping at straws because they've been trying other products and they bought something that they thought was going to help solve their problem, and it did. A client came into my store last year that had had plantar fasciitis for 30 years. He literally walked in with a handful of products. I said, this is what I've been wearing. I looked at him and I said, you came in, I've been here for 14. Where have you been? For over 20 years. I'm just sad that we spent so many years with so much discomfort. I helped relieve a problem that's plagued him for 30 years. I mean, how do you have to go home and talk about that? The Get New Store. Call 1-800-NEW-DEEP or visit gooddeep.com. Need inspiration? Shop Kroger for over 30,000 California resources with savings on low prices and digital coupons for over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump. More savings and more inspiring flavors make Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply. Locked in low prices to help you save big. So what? Look for the locked in low prices tags and enjoy extra savings throughout the store. Kroger, fresh for everyone. There are more identity threats than you realize. You can monitor your credits only a little personal info needs to leak out, like your social security number or password. LifeLock alerts you to threats you could miss. If your identity is stolen, a dedicated U.S.-based restoration specialist will work to fix it. No one can prevent all identity theft or monitor all transactions, but everyone can save up to 25% off their first year with promo code THINGS. Go to lifelock.com. Hard to imagine how long Mother Nature cannot outsmart us. You cannot outrun it. Impossible to afford. Go inside the natural disasters that are changing our world. We have the ability to control so much in our lives that we still can't control Mother Nature. To see it in a series on Earth, someday, setting the pride and mercy SD Services at the local pros for everything HVAC. If you've got an HVAC system that needs to be replaced, look to SD Services. If you need your system repaired, SD Services can do that too. Maintenance, SD's is the company you can trust. And it's not just that. SD Services can take care of your plumbing and electrical problems too. There's a reason why people have been counting on us for home maintenance for more than 75 years. Go to SDSair.com today. That's ESTESair.com. It's that easy. It's SD's. In this week's marketing report, Dana Nussbaum, Executive Vice President, Worldwide Marketing at Warner Brothers Discovery, weighs in on regional audio marketing and the movies.
Everything that we are doing is incredibly data-driven. We are getting signals in every single day about how specific audiences are performing. So although we're marketing at a very broad scale, and that does include specific local markets, that's really the beauty of iHeart's network. You're not serving the same message to a consumer in national necessarily than you may be in New York. You have the ability to be very specific and very personalized at a tremendous scale.
As the number one audio company, iHeartMedia gives marketers access to all, from national to local. Every audience, live conversations, trusted influencers, and the insights and data you need to grow. Not just a media company, iHeartMedia is your access company. If you're a marketer, go to iHeartResults.com. You'll sleep like a baby, knowing you'll never miss your favorite guests or topics ever again. Remember, a one-year subscription comes out to only 15 cents a day. Sign up today at coasttocoastam.com.
Okay, hi everyone. So today we are doing a live stream with some guests talking about connections to category theory. It's something that several people have requested. Frankly, I'm more discouraged with category theory. Category theory is sort of the purports to be the most abstract science game in time for thinking about mathematical science of things. And I have only very slowly understood a very small amount of that category theory, but it was clear from the small amount that I understand that it has lots of goals for things that we're doing. And so our goal today is to try to understand more about relations of physics project category theory. And I do have one story here related to Fabrizio, who's joining us today. How I met Fabrizio, we were at South by Southwest conference at the trade fair there, and there was a whole bunch of wild things at the trade show, and you walk up to one booth and you ask, what do you do? And the person says, we're releasing, we have a giant industrial robot, and we're going to make it dance. And the other person says, this is real thing from that actual place where we've got a scheme for having satellites to release stuff into the upper atmosphere to generate giant continent-sized fireworks. So I walked up to his next booth and I said, what do you do? And that was Fabrizio, and he said, I do categorification of petri nets. That's very different from the robot next door. But anyway, that started a bunch of very interesting conversations.
Actually, I don't know if you noticed that I realized that you were sitting working only like 20 minutes in the conversation.
Yeah, I figured that. That was why I made the whole thing more amusing. That it's like robots and there's categorification of factors.
Yes. I remember at some point they probably asked you very close, oh yeah, in Mathematica we're actually using that, and I was like, I do
Right. So it was a good conversation. So it's one of them. So let's see. For us today, where should we start? I think let's maybe start off talking about kind of the modern view of what is category theory. Category theory originated in the world of sort of organizing anthropology and things like that, and it's been through. So maybe you guys, I'm curious if you guys can sort of characterize how should one think about category theory?
Well, I think that the initial insight of category is the right. Basically, as you say, category theory is being created right from the start instead of communication theory. Basically, in the 40s and 50s, there was a lot of work that was being done in mathematics and areas and some other labs. So people were studying structures that were at the same time geometric and algebraic and stuff like this. And people found themselves in this weird circumstance where they had very well developed theories of single things, right? Because there was rings, trees, and then studying how these things interacted was actually very difficult. And then at some point people started to think, maybe we need theory to talk about the relationships between different theories. And actually, I think that one of the reasons why category theory this infamous this fame of being super complicated is because the kind of stuff that motivated the creation of category theory is so, unfortunately, normally, when people were inducted to category theory, that's one of the worst parts, the most complicated part. And that really didn't tell so many people to say,
Is it possible to remove places and microphones some other way and make it less separated? Just a bit No, because it's clearing the echo from the room, I think. I think that's the problem. Okay. So that's not good. Okay, no problem. So unless anybody else has no idea how to do that. Are you sure you're using that much microphone as opposed to a computer microphone?
I think I with another one that would probably work better.
The other wall. Yeah, right. Usually, most it looks like the inside. That's a lot better, actually.
Nice.
Oh, yeah, that's perfect. Yes.
I have two microphones and I was using the wrong one, so.
Okay, no problem. Great. Okay. We were, so category theory, it's classic use in thinking about kind of the correspondence between different kinds of arguments and different kinds of mathematical structures.
Yes, and then fast forward a few decades, people started realizing that this theory, was actually useful also for talking about applied stuff. And the reason for that is that in the end, category theory, since it studies the relationship between very different entities, it's actually pretty good to describe complex systems, like many applied systems are. Probably the first two biggest successes in applying category theory have been functional programming, which is basically entirely founded on category theory, and
You see, I find that very amusing. I find that certainly very amusing because for 40 years or something, I've built functional programming languages. And yet, if that's a true statement, I really need to understand it because I don't understand that at all.
well, I mean, as soon as you say the important thing in a program are functions,
Yeah.
then you want to say everything you can about how these functions compose. And at that point, all the machinery that category theory gives you becomes very, very useful. It's actually strange because in the end, when you like Rothschild or stuff like that, you are still working, let's say, in the category of sets. Like all your functions are functions between sets. But the point of view of category theory is radically different, and that's what actually gives you something.
See, for example, in symbolic functional language, like written language, the idea of mapping between sort of kinds of objects is very real, and it's something that the unification semantics guys and Dana Scott and so on. But for 40 years, Dana has been sort of, I think, a little bit confused about how it fits into that way of thinking, because what we're dealing with is sort of, we have these symbolic expressions, and they're general symbolic expressions, and we're making transformations on those, and that's different from saying, the symbolic expressions have a life of their own. It's not just, it's a thing in this pool of possible things of a certain type. Maybe this is the wrong, maybe a characterization. The thing I'm curious about, so you're saying, and I'd like to understand this quite frankly, this guy between functional languages and category theory. But maybe I can ask, in my efforts to understand what category theory is, morphisms, all these kinds of things. There's some structural aspects of category theory which are a bit like graphs, where you're dealing with things like graphs. But they're graphs with certain special associativity properties on their edges.
Even more, actually, basically you can see a category as the transitive closure of a graph. So the idea is that every time you have an edge from A and B and one from B and C, you also have one from A and C that represents different positions. And also you have identities. So for each vertex of the graph, you want an edge that is do nothing kind of thing that goes from A to A. And you can see that basically, if you give me a graph, I have a canonical way of building a category out of this graph. So I basically take the edges and I compute adding formally all the possible compositions and the identities. And this is exactly called the three categories generated by the graph. And you can also do the opposite, like you can take a category and forget it is a category and just treat it as your graph. And the nice thing about category theory is that you can say that these corporations are actually a couple of joint functions. So what it means is that it's not just like that I can build a category out of a graph. It's also that if you give me a graph transformation, I can map it to a transformation of the corresponding category. And again, that's pretty much obvious because if you then this vertex goes to this vertex and this edge goes to this edge, then I can formally extend this mapping to all the formal compositions that are introduced.
So hold on. So let me see if I understand it. That's the experiment. So let's say you're saying we have some random graph. So you might have some graph that just looks like.
Actually, random directed graph.
Okay. All right. We want a random directed graph. Let's make a random directed graph. How big would you like it to be? Let's just have 10. Let's do something like this. Okay. Let's make sure. Actually, I'm not sure. Okay. There's a random directed graph. Okay. So we could take. You mentioned transitive closure. I mean, we could say, let's get the transitive closure graph for this graph. Okay, so the transitive closure is a big mess.
Yes. And also you want to join identities.
So we want subgroups for everyone.
Yes.
Okay, so we could do that. We could just say, let's do this, but let's say we just get, let's say, just to draw a definite graph, let's append to the edge list of this graph something that says, going to the edge list of that graph, something that maps hash goes to hash over the vertex list of that graph. And then let's say graph over that. This should have a something for the graph. Okay. All right.
Actually, when you do the transitive closure there, it's automatically recursively done, or you're okay. So yeah, basically this would be the underlying graph to the free category coming from the graph above. Well, I say that this is the underlying graph because at the moment, when you look at this graph, obviously we cannot tell that the loops have to behave like identities, or that some things that we are introducing are compositions of edges. Because the information is somehow forgotten from the category of one. But this is exactly the underlying structure of the free category generated by the graph above. So the cool thing is that if you go all the way up to our first graph and you map it to some other graph, and by mapping I mean we have a function from vertices to vertices and a function from edges to edges, so that source and target of each edge are preserved. Then the idea is that we can lift this to morphism between the corresponding three categories.
Let's start with something much simpler. Okay, so we've got this graph, and you say, so you're going to label every edge. Every edge is going to have an actual, they have actual names. Okay? So edge labels, and okay, so then now everything has a name. Okay, now what am I going to do? So now I'm going to take this, and for every one of those named vertices, I'm going to say two maps, and maybe I have some other graph here.
Yes.
And let's make another graph. Let's say, okay, there was another somewhat similar graph. Maybe I'm going to change some parameters there. Let me say 4 vertices there and 5. Okay, so there's another graph. Okay. So now you're telling me make a mapping from this graph to this graph. Is that right?
If you can, yes. It's not always possible to, if you want to preserve certain targets of this
Well, so a mapping means what? It means I'm taking. How should I think about it?
It means that you are basically mapping the vertices of the first graph to the vertices of the second graph as you want. And then you are mapping the edges of the first graph to the edges of the second graph in a way so that the endpoints of the edges are compatible with the mapping you gave on the vertex. So for instance, what I'm saying is that if you want to map 2 to 3 to something, then you basically have to make sure that vertices 2 and 3 get mapped to the vertices of the target edge. So for instance, if you map 3 to 2, then you cannot map 2 to 3 to 4 to 1, because in that case you are losing the correspondence between the source and the target of the edge.
I think I need a much simpler example. Let's start off with something much more trivial, which I think is let's say I have a car graph. So, okay, there's my first graph.
Yes.
And let's say, and now, okay, and then I have another one of these. Let's say I have 5 edges in this one.
Yes.
Okay, now what does it mean to go map?
Well, in this case, it means that you can map every number in the first one to the same number or bigger in the second. So, for instance, if you map 1 to 1, 2 to 3, 3 to 3, and 4 to 4, and you put the edges to the edges between 1, 2, 3, and 4, then that's about. But for instance, if you map 1 to 1 and 2 to 2, then you cannot map the edge that goes from 1 to 2 to the edge that goes from 4 to 5, because you're losing the endpoint.
Let me see if I understand the context of this. So in traditional and category theory, one thinks about, I mean, let's just do an example of this. I mean, talking about this in terms of this is some morphism, if I understand correctly, mapping. Just give me an example of what.
So in this case, what we are doing we are defining a category of graphs. So actually, graphs will be the objects of our categories, and the mapping I'm talking about are the right kind of structure-preserving morphism you want to pick. So the idea is, if you want to map a graph to another graph, what is the relevant structure that you want this mapping to preserve? So for instance, in the case of a group, then we know that a mapping has to be an homomorphism, because the relevant structure of the group is an operation, like a group multiplication and inverse. And we want mappings that preserve these operations, otherwise they don't make sense from the perspective of groups. So in this case, what is the relevant structure of the graph? Well, the relevant structure of a graph is just that each edge has a beginning and an end. There are vertices, source and a target.
Okay, but hold on a second. There's 2 different levels of what's going on here. I mean, there's the objects that exist in this category, and there's the actual sort of category theoretical layer, and then maybe higher order category theoretical layers that correspond to I think we need to. Okay, let me ask maybe Jonathan, who understands more about what I at least understand, to if you can comment on this, because I'm getting super confused already. What level of stuff we're talking about? I think we're talking about the construction of a category that is being constructed as a graph, as a category of graphs.
Yes.
Yet, it seems like a lot of the structure of category theory operates at the level of talking about transformations within categories, between categories, and so on, which themselves are represented as graphs.
Yes. So yeah, exactly. There are two things. There's the category graph, which is the category that Fabrizio has been defining. There are also notions like the concept of a string diagram, which give you a combinatorial way of representing a category in which you see to associate with it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but so a string diagram, each vertex is a morphism, each edge is an object. And so it gives you a way to, given some arbitrary category, it gives you a way to give you a combinatorial representation of the entire.
Yeah, basically, yes, string diagram is like you are dualizing things. So let's say that points become lines and lines become points. Yes.
And that's a mathematical example. In the case of groups, in the case of you really want algebraic topology, but it would be better if it's something less.
Well, if you take that directed graph you generate result and you treat that as that's some category.
This thing here.
I mean, any of them, any of the ones that you generate with that's not a category. That's an object. I mean, the category, the thing above.
This thing we're talking about is an object in a category, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
but above you generated a thing that was supposed to be the category representation.
Yes, exactly.
Which had the identities and had the transitive closure. So if you take that object and you construct its view, you have vertices where the morphisms are, and you have edges where the objects are. That would be a string diagram.
Right. Okay. Just to help me not get just irreducibly confused, can we talk about categories of things other than graphs? Because if we
Yes, but
graphs,
the thing you construct to the above, we don't know what that's a category of. That's just a category of objects.
Yes.
and this is represented. So tell me,
You can construct a string diagram like that.
So what I was trying to say before is that that thing here that we generated, that comes from a graph. Now the point is that this thing doesn't just come from a graph. The point is that there is a relevant notion of transformation between graphs that will be transported to a relevant notion of transformation between categories, so a functor. And this thing is itself functorial. So what I was trying to say is that the category graph has a functor that goes to the category cat. Their objects have categories and not the functor. So in the end, this, from the categorical point of view, says that, yeah, there is a very nice canonical way of building categories out of graphs, and this canonical way behaves well with respect to how you transform graphs. That's basically.
okay, and let's come back. Again,
I'm sorry, one quick question. This functorial transformation between graphs and the categories of graphs. Did you say that was an adjoint?
Yes, so there is an adjoint from graph to cat, basically.
Okay.
And from graph to cat, you just retrieve the free category out of each graph. And in the other way around, you just forget that categories are graphs. The category secret.
What does that mean?
it happens to category of categories. Right?
Yes. Yes.
So we're already in a little bit of deep water here by the time we. Can we start off with? Let's just take, for example, talking about, let's say, functional programming or something like that. Can we talk about a really elementary example?
Yes.
We can represent morphisms, functors, things like that in terms of something functions.
So one easy example would be you can have a category where your objects are types in your functional programming language, and your morphisms.
So actually, in my life, we have a typeless language. So, okay, let's assume we have that.
Yes, category theory is deeply connected to type theory. So basically, everything you do is type.
Okay, so let's say we have a type of integers, and we might have a type that is something like an array constructed type. presumably we have a base type, and we might have some constructed stuff. Is that right?
Yes, the constructors though will be characterized as some other categorical things, so I would leave them out for now. Because
Okay, but then we've got, okay, so we've got a base type like integer. Now what do we do?
then you can add, for instance, list int, so lists of integers.
Wait. Then I have a constructor. So this is.
No, that's the point. List int is a type. List is a constructor. So list int is the constructor applied to the type. But if you want to describe list, then we'll need to talk about mono, and that's probably the next step. So yeah, you
Okay,
can
so we have a type like that, and we might have a type that's doing the list of listed.
yes. And then basically the idea is that you have functions between these types, and these are your morphisms.
Okay, so for example, I might have a function of an integer that returns an integer.
Yes, exactly.
Or I might have a function g of an integer that returns a list.
Yes, and this will be applied. The first one will go from int to int, and the second one will go from int to list.
Okay, so this one here is characterized as having type int arrow.
Yes.
Okay. Right, and that, okay, so we've got two constructors. We've got the arrow constructor basically, and we've got the list constructor. Correct?
Yes. So I understand why you say that arrow is a constructor, but again, it depends at what level you look at things. Because you can say that f is just a morphism from int to int, and then you are basically saying actually int to int is a type, and that's true, obviously, but that depends on the fact that this particular category has a lot of nice machinery. So in particular, the fact that int to int is itself a type comes from the fact that the category is full monoidal float. But what it means is that basically you can consider that the morphisms between two objects in your category are themselves.
Okay, so wait a minute. This mapping, a function returns something. That's the morphisms are the arrows. Is that correct, sir?
Yeah, the morphism, so the idea is that, the morphisms are the arrows from a type to another type, yes.
Okay.
And then you agree that on each type you have an identity arrow, that is basically the morphism that does nothing. So for instance, you can go from int to int and you just return your dot.
Okay, so there's an identity morphism
For each type.
which would have the property that it is basically the identity, it's essentially something that just takes any type and returns that. It takes anything of that type. Is that correct? It takes anything of that type and returns the thing.
No, you have to think, the idea is that for each type you will have a particular identity morphism. This is the equivalent of the loops you will put in.
No, I understand. So give me a practical example of that. So if for an integer, for example, is the identity morphism the integer comes back as the integer?
Yes, precisely. Yes.
Okay, so it is in fact an identity operation. That's correct. It's not just that an integer comes back as another integer. It's the integer comes back as the same integer. That's true?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And then you see that we also have a notion of composition, namely if you have a function from A to B and one from B to C, you can just pipe one into the other and get a function from A to C.
Okay, so hold on. So let me just understand that. So what you're saying is if F maps, if F of int returns an int, and G of int returns a list of int, then I can perfectly well say F of G of int returns something which is in that particular case the list of int.
Wait, no, it should be G of X, right? If G returns a list of int, then you simplify F to it.
but that's a list of a well, I haven't represented this very well, but I understand that thing's type signature is int goes to int goes to
Yes. And when you compose, you're basically, let's say, forgetting what's in the middle. Then you're just saying that you go from int to list of ints.
yes.
Yeah. So in this case, you see types are useful because they prevent you to compose equals, apples, and oranges. Like, you can't compose it.
I'm the wrong person to try and sell types, but yes, I understand it.
So, I understand that types can get in the way, especially when you want to do like fast prototyping or development.
We don't need to. The idea of types. I understand the idea of types. It's kind of the calculus of types. We can experiment with it. It's not. I mean, we can argue about whether that's useful, but I don't think that's the main point for us. And I want to understand. Maybe you can finally explain more slowly than I've understood before. Things like the Haskell, Curry Howard. Right. Okay, so what I'm understanding here is that this is each one. Tell me the code here. So this is. How would you describe this thing?
That thing I would just not describe it at the moment because, as I said, to be able to speak about that thing categorically, you need more machinery. You have to say that the category is closed. And this means that if your category is closed, then I would say, oh, that's a type. This is the case for type here. But the point is that in general, let me use this example. Suppose I have two topological spaces, okay? And I have continuous functions between them.
Yes.
I don't know if this is the right example, but
maybe take the category of type.
No, because I'm trying to find a non-closed category. That's exactly the point. So
I don't know.
It is not. Yeah, but it's not closed. So the idea is that if I have two topological spaces and I have continuous functions between them, the set of continuous functions between these topological spaces is not itself a topological space. Indeed.
So I don't understand. If you just talk about integers, the set of functions between integers is not itself an integer.
Exactly, it's not itself an integer, but if you are looking at it from the point of view of sets, then it is a set. You can always say that function.
Let me understand that. So if I say integers map to integers, right?
Yes.
Then that mapping in and of itself is not an integer. I mean, of course you could Gödel number it, and then it would be an integer.
Yes.
But I don't know how that relates to anything. But assuming you're not doing computation theory, then that thing is an integer. Now, if you say this is a mapping from sets to sets,
then you have a way to speak about that object. You can even do int to int. The point is your context. If those ints are represent, if you're working in the category of sets, then you can say int is a set, and the set of all functions between them is a set. So the point is that within the category of sets, you have a way to represent that arrow as an object. While if your category is not the category of set, that arrow may not represent anything.
Right. So if we believe that the universe is computational, we essentially have a category in which we can represent everything. That is, if everything is both the transformations and the objects can be represented computationally.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in other words, even if we could, basically, with Gödel numbering, we could represent that function from integers to integers as itself an integer.
Yes, the point of Gödel numbering and the reason why this wouldn't precisely work in category theory is that these properties are always defined category theoretically as universal. So you want to say that there is one and only one way to do this. Like category theory works up to canonical kind of stuff. And the Gödel numbering is not canonical. Like you can choose to do the Gödel numbering in another way. And
I'm a little confused by that because in the case of sets, the kind of the representation of a set, your claim is that sort of as soon as I'm saying it's a set to obey the actions of set theory, then there's only one way to represent this collection of things as a set. Is that the claim?
up to isomorphism.
Okay. So you can relabel the elements and things like that because
And you will always have a bijection between your representations. Yes.
Okay. So, by the way, I did notice that we had Matthew on this. Matthew's still here. If you want to make some comment about how this relates to because we thought about all kinds of numbering and pairing functions and so on. Matthew here? Yes, no, okay. Right. So
I am here, Stephen.
okay. Did you want to make a comment on the statement that there's no canonical pairing function? Because basically what the code says.
No, I think you're not going to make it.
Okay. Okay, so I'm understanding that this notion of a closed category is something where all the things that you're operating on and this whole these mappings are themselves represented in the category.
Precisely. So in arbitrary, like in general, in category theory, you can always say, I consider the set of morphisms between two objects. If your category is as called an internal object or closed, then you can actually say there is an object within my category that represents this set.
Okay, so you're saying the main thing is there's a set of morphisms between objects, and the question is, can you represent those morphisms in that set? Can you represent that set as itself a member of the category?
Exactly. So an example of this would be vector spaces, because linear applications between two vector spaces form themselves a vector space.
Okay, so wait a minute. That is saying vector spaces with particular operations, mapping vector spaces to vector spaces.
What I'm saying is your category is vector spaces as objects, and linear functions as morphisms between them.
Okay, so you're saying those linear functions can themselves be represented as vector spaces?
Yeah, you can always endow them with a notion of with a vector space structure in a quite canonical way, because you can say the sum of these functions is defined by doing the sum pointwise in the target vector.
But just to understand my world of transformations between symbolic expressions. So in my world, expressions have some structure. They're objects, and you can think of them as being some factor. Now, meanwhile, the transformations between symbolic expressions are themselves symbolic expressions. So I can add, f of g of whatever. So,
so your category will be most likely closed, or if you want to categorize this, you want to aim to have a closed category.
Right. Okay. So this is an expression, and this transformation rule is also an expression.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. All right. So what? Okay. So I have these categories. Some of them are closed. Some of them are not closed. You're saying the interesting ones tend to be closed. Is that true?
No, not necessarily. There are for instance, being closed when you do topological kind of stuff, genetic kind of stuff is not that common.
That's the statement that in mathematics, in a symbolic language, functions, programs and data are the same kind of thing. I mean, you're saying being closed is basically that programs and data are the same kind of thing.
Yeah, that's why this is at the heart of the Curry-Hour lambda isomorphism. Yes, precisely.
Okay.
is because, yeah, you can always consider like all the programs that carry you from A to B as a piece of data, and yeah, there is this correspondence.
Okay, all right. So that's the notion of a closed category. So in the case of, for example, graphs, just to do the exercise, when you're talking about mapping between graphs, that mapping is probably itself representative, right?
Graphs should be closed, or maybe they can correct me if this I'm wrong.
Of course, so it's very, very good.
Yes.
Okay,
So it's
so for graphs, when you say we have a mapping between graphs, you're saying basically you've got a graph, one of those graphs ahead of graph, then another graph, and the mapping between graphs takes vertices to vertices, for example.
yes.
That itself can be represented as a graph. Just say vertex A in the first graph goes to vertex 2 in the second graph.
Yes, basically. I didn't work out the details, but yeah, the idea is that there is another graph that, let's say, faithfully represents this mapping between graphs. Yes.
Right. Okay. So in
Actually, not a graph. Let me think about it.
what kind of mapping you have? If you're saying, go ahead. Okay.
Sorry?
I was saying that the graph represented the mapping between graphs is the graph you get by first multiplying the two graphs together, so that now you have vertices which have pairs of vertices. The first one is the vertex from the first graph, and the second one is the vertex from the second graph, and so on. Then you need stuff that gets sent to stuff. So it's very
Well, I'm not. I can see that there's a way of. Okay, within reach to say that what this graph category is closed. It's obviously not within reach. You're telling me it's not within reach to say that the integer category, the category of integers and functions on integers, is closed because you're not allowing real numbering for reasons I more or less understand. So, in other words, programs equals data is clearly much more general than the things you normally think of as being data in a program. So we're not. Okay. So now I think I understand. I hope I understand. So we've got a category of some kind of thing, and we've got certain morphisms which are mappings from between objects in this category.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
Correct statement. And I think that the most important thing that needs to be said is that the same kind of thing can be categorized in different ways. The real question we should ask is, if I want to study, for instance, groups, what is the relevant kind of transformation between these groups? What group-like properties we want to preserve? This gives us a notion of morphism. And this gives us a definition of category. But then the idea is that there are examples of categories that are actually the same objects. One example, for instance, is topological spaces. I can say that I have a category where my objects are topological spaces and my morphisms are continuous functions. But I could also say, no, actually, my objects are topological spaces, but my functions are homotopy equivalent classes of continuous functions. So I'm considering deformations up to homotopy. And this will give me two very different categories, even if the objects are the same. And the reason is that I'm focusing on different kind of transformations. So that's the real power of category theory, is being able to say, isolate the kind of property you care about. So, for instance, each group is trivially also set. Just like you throw away the group operations and the underlying thing to the group is a set. And a group homomorphism is always a function between sets. So you can also say that, well, actually, I can see groups as a subcategory of sets and study them there. But in doing that, obviously you are using the group like object. So the whole point of category theory is basically this, is to being able to find the right definitions that represent the things you care about. And in fact, in our work, it's like 80% of the time you use it just to define things, and 20% of the time you use it to prove things. Because when your definitions are the right ones, the proofs they will just follow, because they basically follow canonically from the definition. It's actually quite rare to have a really hard.
Right. That's why people don't use. I mean, people have written category theory packages for Mathematica, but they are mostly structural. It's not like you're doing. It's not like traditionally, in my understanding at least, but in category theory that you're doing, non-trivial country computations to figure things out. Right? First statement. Country computations. That once your statement is once you can write the thing in the formalism, once you can write something down in the formalism, everything is sort of obvious.
Yes, basically I think that's the whole purpose of category theory. Yes.
Okay, so I would claim that right there is telling me that there's a great depth, because basically you're saying there's nothing computationally irreducible that ever gets done in category theory. Everything is on the surface of things that are essentially structural. And that means
and even more importantly, the more you study category theory, the more you see that everything is everything else. Like, this is a famous statement in category theory. Basically, in category theory, all the categorical tools we develop are amount just to reframe the same stuff under a different point of view. And so in the end, you say, okay, I have a set. What is a set? Well, it's a set, and it's a category, and it's also a noun functor, and it's also a mutable object. It's a what? And that's what is super confusing, especially in the beginning. That really, everything is everything else. You say, I define limits, which are an important categorical concept. And then you say, well, actually, limits are adjunctions. Actually, adjunctions are limits, and people, they start freaking out. They know that, it feels like nothing is ever fixed. But the point is that every time you're just developing a new point, pretty much everything you already did up to that point.
Okay, so let's try to take a couple of examples. Let's talk about groups for a second. So groups have elements. They can be defined in terms of, they have the elements can be represented as products of generators, but there are different choices of generators that you can make for a group, still maintaining the particular relations. And in different generators you have different relations, but it's still the same group, as you can determine by looking at homomorphisms between these groups. So how do I think about that? In other words, in category theory, if I want to have a particular group, the group A4 or something, right? If I have that particular group, is that something that I talk about in category theory, or do I only talk about the set of all groups?
We can do it. So there are two main ways to think about groups in category theory. The first thing is a group is itself a category. And you can see a group as a category with only one object, and each morphism is basically a loop arrow on this object, and each one of these morphisms represents a group element. And then basically you require that for each one of these arrows there is also an inverse that goes the other way around, and that composed with it gives you the identity.
Okay, now your question. Why isn't this polyglot a thing that represents, that corresponds, why can't I think of these things as objects? These are elements of the group, right? And these arrows that correspond to the multiplication by generators, why can't those be called as
Arrow correspond to multiplication of generators. Well, you have to define composition.
No, you do define composition. Composition is you multiply by this generator, then you multiply by this generator, and you get from that element to that.
Yeah, but you don't have an arrow between those two elements.
So you're saying if I can twist off, and I said the size of the carrier.
Yes.
So if I take that graph and I make a very, very messy transitive closure graph,
Perfect. Yes.
then what the heck am I doing? I mean, this is saying, so from any element, by the structure of the group, I can get to any other element, because by definition, by multiplying by amount of generators, I can get to any other element. Right?
Yes, that should be correct, yes.
Right, so this is a complete graph.
Okay.
Although the particular sequence of generators that I need to multiply by to get, I mean, the word problem is like, is there a particular sequence of generators?
Yes.
That?
And that will give you different arrows in that thing.
Right, so in what sense, I mean, just to understand, is there anything, can category theory say anything useful about what I just constructed, or is this just a sort of degenerate case or something that one might think about category theory?
I don't think in this case, I mean, on the nose, you can say anything particularly useful, but again, like, the point is always coming up with a clever definition. Now, usually, if you can say something useful, it's because we didn't define the category in the right way. It's actually very difficult to come up with meaningful examples on the spot that can,
Okay, let's talk about a case that the Curry Howard business, because we have, so for example, in our language we would have something where we can make a proof, right? So we've got, well, let's do this. Let's do a very simple case. Let's pull up a random example here. Let's do proof. So this would be the axioms of proof theory. Okay, so I don't know how we think about this categorically, but I could say perfectly well, I could say so maybe you can explain to me. So this now would be a representation of a proof so this is a representation of proof theory. This is a representation of proof in group theory. So is there a way of understanding? So one thing I can think about is each one of these pieces here. Well, maybe Jonathan, who wrote this story.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Curry-Howard isomorphism in the context of equational proof is just stating that every proof has an associated proof function, and every proof function can be interpreted in the proof. So if you call fine equation proof, but instead of requesting the proof graph, you get a proof function, you get a symbolic piece of work from language code. So then you can run that.
What happens by that? Do I just say,
it should just say true.
I just apply it to nothing?
Yep.
That wasn't a very exciting function.
It's a pretty exciting function because it verifies that proof is actually correct.
yeah.
So my point is the direct fine equational proof interpretation of the Curry-Howard isomorphism is that every symbolic proof has an associated proof function, and moreover, the more surprising direction, that every symbolic piece of work in language code has an interpretation as a proof object.
Is it the code itself, or is it the execution of the code somehow? No, it's the code itself. So you're saying, I could imagine something where, I mean, this is where I get really confused. So let's say I write down something like this. What is this associated proof? I mean, that thing just sits there.
Right. So in that case, you can treat that as being a proof that the associated computation holds. That's a trivial interpretation of it. The evaluation f of g of x, y equal to z that evaluation terminates. And that expression that you just output is the proof of that is true.
So if I type in something like this, let's say I type 2 plus 3 equals 4. Okay, divided by times 1 plus 6 times 7. Okay? So that trace will show me the sequence of operations that took place to get through this. Is that relevant to anything? Should I think of that as, I mean, is that what you mean by
Yeah, so those would be, you can interpret those as being intermediate steps. Each one of those could be treated as, again, in the language of fine equation of proof, each one of those could be treated as the statement of a substitution lemma, with the particular symbolic transformation from one to the other being the application of a rewrite operation. And so that is a sequence of substitution lemmas that constitutes the proof of that particular evaluation summation.
Okay, so what is the current Howard statement?
Like I said, I mean, Fabrizio probably has a more general, but I mean, there are all kinds of formulations in terms of dependent type theory and so on. But the direct fine equation of the proof formulation is exactly that every proof object has an associated proof function, and that every piece of code can be interpreted as a proof object.
Every piece of code can be interpreted as a proof function. So that proof is the proof that, so wait a minute, every piece of code, the proof, but every piece of code will have an input and will have an output. I'd say 2 plus 6, and it will, whoops, it's an input. So I could say something like 2 plus 2, and it will come out as 4. So are you saying that when you say a piece of code, you mean the code 2 plus 2 as the sort of proof 2 plus 2 is 4? Is that right?
Right.
Okay, so then you're saying, in the language of sort of some category theory thing, you might be saying 2 plus 2 is transformed to 4, something. Is that right? Is there a...
There's a reason why it's difficult to understand these ways, because you are thinking about terms without thinking about types. So,
the thinking in terms of like a type programming language would be much clearer.
yes.
Okay, so Callie, can you do an example?
I mean, I'm not claiming to be a particular, but so mine, and I think there are different ways of looking at it. But my understanding is that if you can sort of compile and run the program, then the fact that you're able to do that is sort of like a witness to the types making sense. And that corresponds in a way to a proof about the type. Is that roughly right, guy? I'm not an expert, but that was my intuition for it.
Well, so if you're proving some arbitrary theorem, the statement is that the proof of that theorem is equivalent to the statement that the execution of a program yields the result of a particular type. And so in the case of a proof function here, that's why I gave the example of a proof function, you can think of it as, the possible outcomes of a proof function have 2 types, so to speak, even though they're not technically true and false.
Let's say that if you want to prove a theorem, okay, so you say this, what you have is a statement that says type of hypothesis implies type of thesis. And the idea is that basically this implication is telling you that as soon as you can produce something of type hypothesis, then you can produce something of type thesis. And Curry-Hour saying that this corresponds to a function or a proper functional program that goes from hypothesis to thesis. And now hypothesis and thesis correspond to status properties. So, yeah.
So this is very abstract way of putting it. Maybe we could say something like, you can embed a sort of proof in a program in a particular way, such as if you're able to run the program, you kind of verify the proof. Is that correct? Or is that not right?
Well, I mean, because of the Curry-Hour correspondence, yeah, if you have a program that proves something and that compiles, then you can say that that is a proof as long as
Line that you misunderstand is that when you're speaking about proving in this context, kind of a different way from the standard way of proving things. Maybe you learn how to prove things in the classical way, but the Curry-Hour of this really works when you're using it in a way. So the proving something means to construct a witness of the truth of the statement.
Right, exactly.
You're demonstrating that a particular type is inhabited. But in this particular case,
yes.
Okay, if you interpret true and false as being elementary types, it would effectively a true function. Then the outcome of the true function is exactly demonstrating that a particular type, in this case true, is inhabited.
So you can have something more complex, like a code type.
Right. Right. So we're held back by the fact that we don't have a natural typographic structure. We will find
Something like the wave function is you probably did out one before. That's something actually really close to this how wave thinking, because also something that is really integrated with the interpretation with concept of normalization. So the computation is really normalization of terms, which means that, like, from a logical standpoint, you have terms which are like syntactical expressions, and then you want to say that two things are equal, like